One guy who is not going to be president is South Carolina Republican Senator Tim Scott, who has ended his campaign in total and complete humiliation. We knew his campaign was dead on arrival. At the very top level, like if you zoom out, we can say, well, what's Tim Scott's tax policy? Does he want a 39% or 34% top tax rate? What does Tim Scott think about what should be done with regard to bringing supply chains back home? Okay, that's micro. Zoom out. Is the Republican electorate that voted for Trump going to make a black guy their nominee? It's that simple. And so many of you got it right when Tim Scott announced. It is just from an identity perspective, not what the electorate that just in a bloodthirsty way went for Trump. They're just not going to go with Tim Scott. And indeed, they haven't. Here is a report from the New York Times. Tim Scott suspends 2024 campaign as his sunny message. That's one way to put it. As his sunny message failed to resonate. He entered the Republicans' presidential race as a rising star with substantial financial resources, but struggled to break out of the pack of Trump challengers. That is absolutely true. The article says Scott entered the race in May, pledging a different kind of message from the often apocalyptic tenor of some in the Republican field, including Trump. But Scott's brand of sunny optimism holds little appeal in the modern GOP, where the impulse among the party's core voters, encouraged by Trump, is indeed to be combative. Look at the money that Scott spent. Scott started his campaign with $22 million in fundraising, spent millions in TV ads, but the poll numbers were stagnant, never had a breakout moment on the campaign trail. The super PAC supporting him, fueled by $30 million in donations from Oracle co-founder Larry Ellison, announced it was seeing no progress. It slashed television ads and on and on. And as you all know, the campaign went absolutely nowhere. Where does this leave us at this point in time? Well, I mean, look at what's left, right? You've got Donald Trump polling almost 60. DeSantis has seen a little bit of a spike to 14, but it seems impossible that DeSantis will end up as the nominee. Nikki Haley has surged to 9. She has gone up from 1 to 9. That's a 9x on her polling. Maybe Nikki Haley can figure out some way to stay in this thing. Vivek Ramaswamy's campaign seems dead. He was supposedly surging, then lost half of his support. And then you've got Chris Christie. This is all that's left. Tim Scott is out. Pence is out. Honestly, I don't even know if Burgum and Hutchinson are still running. I think they're not, but maybe they are. None of them is polling even 1%. And so, I mean, they don't want Chris Christie. They don't want Vivek. DeSantis lost 2/3 of his support. If it's not Trump, now with the exit of Tim Scott, it seems it is only potentially Nikki Haley. As far as Tim Scott is concerned, I guess he'll now have plenty of time to awkwardly stand next to his supposed girlfriend. I don't know how many of you saw. He brought his girlfriend up on the stage after the last debate, and it was super, super awkward. So he'll be able to maybe work that out. And in the meantime, for all the talk of a contested primary, it's not even obvious to me there's going to be a Republican primary. The way that this is going, and we still are waiting, even though Pence is gone and Scott is gone, they still are both appearing in a lot of primary polling. By the end of this week, we will probably have polls where Scott and Pence's 5% will have been absorbed by someone. If it's mostly absorbed by Trump, it'll actually put Trump over 60%. If Nikki Haley cannot figure out a way to win a state early, there may not even be a primary for the Republican Party by the time Super Tuesday comes around. So that's where things are today. The Tim Scott candidacy did not even pass the sniff test. And what now becomes a real question is, what do these Trump voters want out of a candidate and out of Trump? What do they expect over the next few months as the voting starts? And how, if at all, will they be impacted if Donald Trump is just so busy going from courtroom to courtroom as a criminal defendant that he can't really run a campaign? For all the talk about Biden ran a campaign from his basement, save a handful of rallies here and there, Trump is not doing a lot of campaigning. And it's not totally clear at this point what the Republican voters want. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Probably not today, probably later in the week. After the show, we are going to talk about one particular issue. This is the last gasp of the Republican challengers to Trump is starting to say, hey, you know what? Trump does seem to be suffering from cognitive decline. Something happened this weekend that pushed the cognitive decline story into the mainstream. We will look at it. We will look at what Republicans are saying and see if it'll make any iota of a difference. So I wrote another book for kids. The first book was Think Like a Detective. The point of the first book was to teach kids critical thinking, which Republicans don't want them to learn, because when kids learn critical thinking, they don't vote for Republicans. The new book is Think Like a Scientist. This is a fun adventure teaching kids the scientific method. Again, Republicans aren't big on kids learning the scientific method because when they do, they're less likely to fall for Republican lies about climate change and vaccines and so many other things. You can get the new book as well as the first one at davidpakman.com/book. This is part of the Adventures in Thinking series. Can you imagine that we're doing this? We are. davidpakman.com/book. 13,500 copies of the first book have sold. I'll bring you an update soon on sales for the second book. Think Like a Scientist, davidpakman.com/book.